I published a new post earlier this afternoon discussing my recent trades. The stock market declined about 20% quickly after Trump announced retaliatory tariffs on April 2nd, and then quickly started a rebound when he paused them on April 9th. The rally has continued since April 9th, and the stock market averages have reached new highs. If the S&P 500 had never recovered from that 20% decline in early April, I could understand a released stock market rally now based on the frameworks for some trade negotiations having tariff rates below what would effectively have caused an embargo, and that was the case for many of the retaliatory tariffs that he announced, that Trump announced on April 2nd. But a relief rally makes no sense to me when the stock market is at an all-time high. The Republican tariff taxes are already restraining world GDP growth to some extent and are causing U.S. consumer prices to rise, something that will gain momentum as pre-tariff inventory is worked off and more firms have no choice but to raise prices to recoup the full amount of the Republican tariff taxes and their consumer prices, while others will have the financial capability to gradually recoup the tariff taxes by increasing their product prices, as I said, more gradually, as they always have done whenever there is input cost inflation to them. And tariff taxes are a form of input cost inflation. There is already in place a 50% Republican tariff tax on all aluminum and steel imports, and those are sizable into the United States. And the 50% tariff tax on copper imports is scheduled to go in effect on August 1st. Copper prices in the United States have already risen about 13% since Trump made that announcement of the copper tariffs earlier this month. I would expect them to rise if there are no exemptions to the 50% tariff tax when he announces the final outcome on August 1st. In the past, when there has been a tariff hike, as there were in Trump's first term, domestic manufacturers used the tariff hike on imports to raise their product prices. So the tariff taxes will have a dual impact on raising consumer prices, both from the U.S. importer that pays the Republican tariff tax and the domestic companies that have a new price umbrella created by the tariffs to raise their prices. I will link a video in the More section below on this topic that discusses that actually happening in the first Trump term. What would you expect the companies to do if their competitors who import their products from overseas have to raise prices to recoup the tariff taxes? Investors are living in a fantasy world and dismissing the inflationary impacts of tariff taxes longer term as they increase consumer prices above where they would have been without the tariff taxes. Trump and other Republicans will continue to claim that foreign countries pay the U.S. tariff taxes, and that easily debunked claim will be believed by millions who will not spend 10 seconds of their time online to find out that the U.S. importer, of course, pays the tariff to the U.S. Customs Bureau. Sometimes the U.S. Postal Service may collect the tariff as it is done when I've shipped something from overseas that I had to pay in order to take possession of the product that was shipped by mail from an overseas supplier. The importer has to have the capital to make payment before taking possession of the imported product, and many smaller firms do not have the financial resources to make a large tariff tax payment before they could even take possession of the product, let alone sell the product, which may be impossible due to consumer resistance to the tariff-induced price hike. I mentioned in my last video that lying is a path to political power in the United States. I wrote a post that was published on 9/15/2011 about that subject long before Trump became the unchallengeable leader of the GOP and before he made over 30,000 documented false and misleading statements during his first term in office. It is not necessary to successfully manipulate even a majority of voters with false and misleading statements, but only a significant minority. 30 to 40% of the voters is more than sufficient, and many of those are just easily manipulated and will not bother to check the veracity of the statements being made, which would prove that they are demonstrably false, even if that effort takes only a few minutes online. So it will be sufficient for a party to achieve political power using a constant stream of demonstrably false information and narratives. And gerrymandering, which has become a really serious obstacle to democracy, will allow the party to retain power in state legislatures and congressional districts. The Republican justices have permitted political gerrymandering to occur. One of the demonstrably false narratives that Trump started to use prior to the election is that U.S. tariff taxes actually paid by U.S. importers are paid instead by foreign countries whose companies ship the products to the United States. In that false narrative, the tariff taxes are like free money to the U.S. government, since the importer does not have to pay the Republican tariff taxes and consequently does not have to raise prices to recoup what they actually have to pay in tariff taxes from consumers. This Republican false narrative about tariff taxes, which is accepted by far too many voters, may be the one that ends up causing a eureka moment for many of them who are and have been permanent residents of the Orwellian world that Trump has created for them up to now, where no accurate information is allowed to exist that contradicts his reality creations. More consumers will start to realize in the coming months and years that they are actually the ones paying the highly regressive Republican tariff taxes, which are hidden from them. And that tax, for those who may figure this out, will probably exceed whatever the benefit that they have been given in the BBB bill as far as tax cuts. For me, that's only $300 to $400 annually, and I will easily end up paying more in the Republican tariff taxes than I will receive in that tax benefit in the BBB bill. Maybe a few of them will even realize that they're being milked with a regressive tax hike so that the extremely rich Republican contributors do not have to pay more. I would say just wake up, but many will never wake up. Another possible series of events that may pierce that bubble is the Epstein controversy and the release of the Epstein files. I discussed that subject in my blog post. I pointed out in that post, and I quoted from the Solicitor General brief before the Supreme Court, that there is a split of authority among appellate courts whether or not the non-prosecution agreement given to Epstein and his co-conspirators by the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of Florida, the Republican Alex Acosta, applied to Maxwell and would prohibit her prosecution in the Southern District of New York. As to whether or not that prosecution agreement was broad enough to prevent the prosecutor in the Southern District of New York from even bringing charges. That will be resolved either by the Supreme Court refusing to grant Maxwell's petition for cert, or by deciding the case if they accept the petition. As to my investments, the stock market rally, given what I perceive to be substantial potential negative economic developments on the horizon, has made me less comfortable with stocks. So I'm still a net seller. I would add this caveat for those who do not know me or are familiar with my blog posts that I published since October 2008. I do not need to take stock risk with my capital. I only have to preserve what I already have and earn some income on my portfolio. Currently, my interest income after tax exceeds my living expenses by over 50%.